The purpose of this video is to unpack the dimensions of physical activity. In order to remember the dimensions of physical activity, we can use the FIT acronym, and FIT stands for frequency, intensity, type, and time. The first element of the FIT formula is frequency. And frequency is how many times was the activity performed in a given time period, and we usually use that time period as a week, sometimes per day. It's outlined in bouts, also known as sessions, and an example of that is I performed 15 bouts of exercise this week, or 15 sessions of exercise this week. The second element of the FIT formula is intensity, and exercise intensity can be classified as light, moderate, or vigorous. And there's a number of ways that we can measure intensity, including the Borg perceived exertion, measuring heart rate, or metabolic equivalent. Borg's rating of perceived exertion is a scale that was developed by a guy with the last name Borg to monitor and interpret the intensity of physical activity. Often it's used in aerobic activity. It's basically numbers out of 20 which indicate how people feel when they are performing physical activity. And it correlates quite well with heart rate, so if you multiply the Borg numbers by 10, it often correlates quite well with the person's heart rate at that time. This is an example of the Borg rating of perceived exertion scale. You can see on the left hand side we have a series of numbers, and then there's a description that goes with those numbers. So as the person is performing physical activity, they give themselves a score based on how hard they think they are working. And this correlates quite well with the intensity level of the exercise. Heart rate, or percentage of maximum heart rate, is also a useful way to measure exercise intensity. You can calculate your maximum heart rate by using the formula 220 minus your age. So for example, if you were 20 years old, it would be 220 minus your age, which would equal 200. So that is an estimate of that person's maximum heart rate. In terms of the intensity that correlates with that, so for low intensity, less than 50% of your max heart rate, so you'd be looking for this person, it would be less than 100 beats per minute. Moderate intensity is between 50 and 70% of max heart rate, so for this person, between 100 beats per minute and 140 beats per minute. And vigorous intensity is anything that is above 70% of the person's max heart rate, so anything above 140 beats per minute for this person would be considered vigorous intensity activity. The next way of measuring exercise intensity is using a metabolic equivalent score. And we use the metabolic equivalent score to basically measure how hard or how much energy someone is expending while they are performing a certain type of activity. 1 MET is considered to represent resting energy expenditure levels, and it's basically worked out generally using how much oxygen someone is consuming. The next element of the FIT formula is the type of activity, and we can classify the type of activity into 6 broad categories. They can be either rest or sedentary behavior, exercise for flexibility, exercise for strength and endurance, active aerobic activity, active sports and recreation, or lifetime physical activity. The physical activity pyramid was developed to outline the types of physical activities and how much you should be getting of each. So you can see at the base level of the pyramid down here, we have our lifetime physical activity. So that's everyday things. It's moving around. It's active transport. It's walking instead of taking your car. It's playing basic sort of activities. The next level of the pyramid, we have our active aerobic activity and active sports and recreation. So that should be the next level up, and we should be participating in a lot of those. The next level up is exercise for flexibility and exercise for muscle strength and muscular endurance. And the final area is rest or inactivity. So we should be trying to minimize the amount of sedentary behavior that we participate in. The final element of the FIT formula is time, and time is basically how long the physical activity bout was 4. So for example, if I went and played a sport and I was out there exercising for 60 minutes, then the time would be 60 minutes for that bout. Often in the National Physical Activity Guidelines, they talk about the time required per day. So for children and young people, they do need to try and get at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. For older Australians, it is 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity per day. All right, just to recap on this video. So we've unpacked the question, what are the dimensions of physical activity? And we've talked in a little bit more detail about what frequency is, how we can measure intensity, different methods, the different types of physical activity, and also the time that physical activity bouts occur for.